We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. Now, we're continuing our conversation with Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor. Earlier in the show, we were talking about what's happening in the tax field for the United States. But I want to get somewhere that's a bit more specific or closer to, as I alluded to, home here. And that's what's happening with housing stocks and the ability of Americans to take their slice of the American dream in terms of home ownership, Andrew. And what's the current outlook for, let's be a bit more specific, what's the current outlook for young people trying to get onto the housing ladder?
Well, good luck. But Redfin, so it's a real estate data services firm, and they recently came out with their projections for what looks like over the coming year, and they projected a home price would rise about 4%, mortgage rates would hover between 6 and 7%, new home sales would be flat, and then new home builds would actually decline because you have the lag effect of the higher interest rates. So overall, the housing market pretty much be more of the same that we've seen in the last couple of years, but not to the extent of such acceleration of home prices.
So the middle figure that you put there with the mortgage interest rates at 6 to 7%, I think that's quite a fascinating number, because obviously that's double what it was like 5 years ago. And so people aren't selling their houses, which means that there's no older stock going out onto the market, which means I guess people are hanging on to their houses, which means
so that's actually a term economics called the golden handcuffs effect.
Right, exactly. And so what you end up with is a situation where there's actually just not the housing stock availability for people to buy houses when they come of age, when they come to the majority, when they start earning some money, even if they do have a decent paying job or get help from friends and family. It's probably not going to be enough to get them into something of value. There's this overpriced part now, which kind of makes the houses, they're not really worth the price that you'd pay for them if you could afford to pay the price for them.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And actually, last year, for the first time on record, existing home prices were more expensive than new home prices, based on what you alluded to. I think with the both Redfin and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, they released a report last year, and it looked at the percentages of people with certain mortgage rates, and a majority of current homeowners, they have rates that are below 4% around there. So you're going to be hard pressed to find people who want to sell their home based on the fact that they have 3 or 4% mortgage rates, and they bought their home before that huge spike in home prices. So why would they want to move? So there's such a hesitance to do that, and therefore people have to go into these new home sales. But even so, I mean, and perhaps this is a different discussion for another day, but the quality of these new homes and the size of these new homes is such a problem for young families trying to get their foot in the door.
Yeah, I'm reminded of is it Malvina Reynolds little boxes made of ticky tacky? And they all look just the same. There's a lot of these projects putting out 150, 200, 300, 400 homes, and they're tiny little boxes in not great neighborhoods, because they're being built just outside the urban areas so they can apply for the zoning regulations, and obviously the cost is cheap for the builders on that and for the real estate developers. But they're all these tiny little ticky-tacky boxes, and you can just look at them and think, well, if they look this bad when they're brand new, give them 10 years. These are going to be deserts of misery.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so absolutely. So so first, it's better than coffin boxes you have in Hong Kong. I'll give them that. But second of all, the quality of these new builds is astounding. That's why. So in Toronto, you look at a lot of these condominiums, and they're just flooding the market because For one, nobody wants to buy, 300 or 400 square feet apartments that are one bedrooms or bachelors. You can't have a family in these places. The construction, even the floor layout of these buildings is just atrocious. It's horrible. But you have a thing called special assessments. Now in Florida, all the state passed a law requiring these condominiums to apply special assessments on these suites. Now, special assessment is different from a condo fee. A special assessment happens when, if there's a flood, if a roof needs to be replaced or rebuilt or whatever the case, that special assessment can be, from a few thousand to tens of thousands of dollars applied to the owners who have to cover these costs. Now, my prediction in a place like Toronto, when you have such low quality condominiums, you're going to have these massive special assessments. You've already seen that in various builds that happened, let's say a decade ago in the northern part of Toronto. There was a flood in the basement and the owners had to pay about $10,000 to cover that cost. So that's going to be quite the norm in the few years, both, of course, in Toronto, but also in the United States.
Yeah, it's just a personal note here. The house I live in now is probably about 120 years old, and the one that I'm moving into soon is roughly the same, maybe a little bit older. But these things, they're built to last. Yeah. These are not fancy places, by the way. They're not old mansions, but they're standard housing stock that you would consider for families, and they're built to last. They require a little bit of upkeep now and then, but they're not going to fall apart, which is very much what happens with the new building stocks. Now, there's a rush to get these new builds done in the United States and elsewhere. This is a global, let's say a Western global problem. Yep. And something that's vastly overlooked by legislators on Capitol Hill is the impact of mass uncontrolled immigration. Now, some estimates put during the Biden term in office, 6.5 million new people came to the United States. Now, some of those will be families, and not everybody's going to want to live in, a single person apartment, although stocks on single person apartments are also shy apparently at the moment. But where are they going to go, Andrew? And how does this, that's the question I was coming at. 6.5 million new people. Where do we put them?
Yeah, when you already have about just on renting alone, you have about 7 million unit shortage. So that's the thing. So when you have the discussion about the impact of legal and illegal immigration on housing, the conversation is always about, okay, they're raising the price of homes. But the problem is with if you look at the Center for Immigration Studies data, 90% of households that are headed by illegal immigrant, they're renters. So it's the rental market which mostly impacts the poor and growing the middle class as well. They have that impacts that corner of the housing market, and there are not enough new builds happening. And actually, the recent data show that construction of new apartments has actually been on the decline. And that's I think I alluded to before, maybe offline. You and I had a discussion, and that's due to the lag effect of higher interest rates. It costs more for these builders to borrow and build these things. So it's not going to be something that happens overnight. It's going to happen over time. But there is also at the same time, there's also some optimism going on, because you see the shelter inflation has actually plateaued and it's been gradually easing. And there's also a lag effect when you assess shelter inflation, because you have the rollover, you have the new leases. So inflation, annual shelter inflation was about 5% a few months ago. Now it's around 4.6, 4.7%. But to reach that 2% target, that's going to be quite the challenging in the next couple of years. I know both sides want to find a resolution overnight. That's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be over the next decade, because you had about 15 years of underbuilding due to the global financial crisis.
Not much hope on the horizon for young buyers, but we'll see what happens over the next few years. Andrew Moran, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests today, Dave Patterson and Andrew Moran. And of course, extend my thanks to you, the listeners, who tune in each and every week to hear what we have to say. Thanks for being here. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. Thanks again for being here.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.